and welcome to the biggest military air show in the world. We're at RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire for the Royal International Air Tattoo 1999. Some 200,000 people are expected here on one of the hottest weekends of the year for some of the hottest flying action to be seen anywhere. Many air shows have been cancelled this year because so many aircraft and airfields have been involved in NATO's action in the Balkans, and for a while it was feared that this show might also be a casualty. Thankfully though, the crisis is now over and NATO are playing a prominent part in this weekend's programme. The show is in fact celebrating the 50th anniversary of NATO, and we'll be seeing a pageant of aircraft from both east and west as old enemies fly together in a new spirit of friendship. We'll also be seeing the amazing B-2 stealth bomber on a rare visit from America. And we'll have a tribute to one of the show's most distinguished patrons, the late King Hussein of Jordan. But first to one of the world's great display teams, the Frecce Tricolore from Italy. And for that, we join our commentator, Sean Maffett.
Well, the Frecce Tricolore, the three-coloured arrows, a lot of people think these are the best in the world. They're certainly up there amongst the greats, disappearing in their own smoke before they start, but that's really just checking the smoke systems out. There are 10 of them, that makes them unique, and they take off in two sections of 5 in their MB339 trainer aircraft. Lovely, elegant paint scheme, and they usually manage to be in the right order as far as the aeroplane numbers are concerned. They quickly get into their first formation. I don't think they actually have a name for this. It's a diamond 9 with one on the bottom, almost like a diamond on a stick. But very quickly they split into a 5 and a 4, and the solo in the middle. Very elegant split, that. The solo, who we'll see a lot more of later, is Captain Dmitri Martzaroli. And 4 aircraft here, heading towards the other 5 of the 9 for one of their opposition crossovers. Captain Martzaroli here rolling his MB339 upside down and then doing a roll from upside down to upside down. And a complicated maneuver here. They just call it a formation double roll. And we're in the cockpit with the leader, Lieutenant Colonel Maurizio De Rinaldis. And here's a very exciting maneuver from the solo. This is called a Lomshevak, the aeroplane twisting round and eventually falling back into its own smoke. No two Lomshevaks are really the same. And another of these crossover maneuvers with the two separate formations bending towards each other and forming that cross in the sky. Dmitri Martzaroli again. Crazy flying, they call this, and it does demonstrate the low-speed maneuverability of this Aeromacchi MB339. And here's a big 9 formation, flying the Italian flag, the red, white and green colours. And there's Dmitri flying in opposition right up through the middle. And the Italians very proud of their flag colours.
This year's Tattoo breaks all previous records with nearly 500 aircraft from over 30 countries taking part. Many of these aircraft, of course, are in the static display, which takes quite some walking. It's a staggering 2 miles long. In all, there are over 700 ground-based exhibits, which, as well as the aircraft themselves, includes flight simulators and countless other attractions. The whole site, from air traffic controllers to program sellers, is staffed by volunteers. For this is a charity event raising money for the RAF Benevolent Fund, which this year celebrates its 80th anniversary. Well, with me now is the director of Theatre 2, Paul Bowen. Paul, you must have been a very worried man, because a few weeks ago this was almost the show that didn't happen.
Very much so. I think the last 3 or 4 months have been a real nail-biting exercise, and it was only really 3.5 weeks ago that we knew that it could definitely take place. So obviously things have had to go on hold somewhat in the planning, and then we had the go-ahead, and boy, we had to run after the days.
I suppose it's quite relevant in many ways, therefore, that we should be celebrating 50 years of NATO here at Fairford this year.
Yes, certainly when we drew up the plan really 15 months ago, we had no idea obviously of the Balkan air war and everything else, but it was always our plan to mark the 50th anniversary of NATO. Strangely enough, at Greenham Common in our early days, we did the 25th and 30th anniversaries, so we felt we really had to do the 50th.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Well, it's not just NATO and the RAF Benevolent Fund that are celebrating birthdays. This year also marks the 75th anniversary of Britain's part-time Air Force, the Royal Auxiliary Air Force. So let's turn the clocks back to their early days and something rather old and gentle.
Yes, in fact, when it was formed in 1924, it was just the Auxiliary Air Force, AAF for short. It wasn't until 1947 that it became the Royal Auxiliary Air Force. This here is Gladiator, which performed extremely well in Auxiliary Air Force hands. More about that in a moment. And 2 1930s trainers here. The plain yellow one is the Avro Tutor of 1931, and the one with the camouflage top half is the de Havilland Hornet Moth of 1934. And the classic Army cooperation aircraft in the days before helicopters were widely available, the Lysander, used for dropping agents behind enemy lines into short fields. You can even see the ladder there so that they could spring in and out quickly, the ladder permanently attached to the door. And back with the Gladiator, and despite the fact that it was a biplane, when they were bringing in monoplane fighters, it did sterling work during the war, and in the hands of 603 Squadron, which was a Royal Auxiliary Air Force squadron, Gladiators downed the first German bomber of the war in September 1939. And here's the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial flight, well, at least 2 of them, the Lancaster and one of the Spitfires. No Hurricane today because of engine problems. The grand sound of 5 Merlin engines roaring away. And this Spitfire is interesting. It's the oldest flying Spitfire in the world, P7350. And the markings on it, XTD, represent a later aircraft of 603, obviously later than the Gladiators. But XT was the squadron markings of 603, and D was for the boss Group Captain George Denham, DFC. And that squadron had the highest kill rate in the Battle of Britain, despite the fact that it was an auxiliary squadron and not a regular one. And the Avro Lancaster B1, demonstrating its enormous bomb bay, capable of carrying the 10,000-pound bomb. One of only 2 Lancasters left flying out of a total of 7,377 built between January 1941 and the end of the war. The other one is in Canada, This one represents the mark this side of the Atlantic. And the Lancaster coming into land now, those two great big main wheels dangling underneath with the enormous balloon tyres. If you hit one of those not exactly right, it can launch you back into the air again, like that. But second time round, it's stuck down nicely. This aircraft in the markings of number 9 Squadron, their motto, per noctem volamus, we fly through the night, as of course the Lancaster was the great night bomber of the Second World War, and the Johnny Walker whiskey insignia on the nose there. Also the nose arch showing all of those individual bombs, indicating the more than 100 operational raids that the particular aircraft depicted here carried out during the war.
And one of Britain's best loved aircraft, the Avro Lancaster. We're now going to return to modern times and a little turboprop trainer built in Poland. It's the PZL Orlik, which means Eagle, flown here by a team of instructors who call themselves Team Orlik.
And actually they're instructors at the Polish Air Force Academy at Dublin. Now we're in the cockpit with Major Andrzej Sowa. He's the man in the middle of the formation. He's the number 3. And that's him right in the middle. A lot of air forces are going for turboprop trainers now instead of all-jet training. 2 aircraft splitting off from the 3. And the 3 going over the top of a looping maneuver there. Back in the cockpit with Major Sowa, and see how tightly he is formating on his leader at the moment. And now the leader turns upside down, and this is a mirror formation. The man flying upside down just flies straight and level, and it's up to the one following to formate on him. Then Sowa pulls away, and the leader rolls the right way up. Solo now, number 5, Captain Dariusz Stanik. And back with the remaining 4 in a very tight tail chase formation. Andrzej Sowa having to work quite hard to keep that number 3 position tight in. Well, the Orlik team from Eastern Europe with their propeller-driven aircraft. Here a fully jet-powered team, the Biele Albatrosy, the White Albatrosses, and this is the L-39 Albatros aircraft from the Slovak Air Force. This is the national team of the Slovakian Republic, and there are 7 of them in it. They take off in 2 Vics of 3, with number 7 following along a little behind the 2 main formations. Elegant little aeroplane, about the same size as the British Hawk, roughly comparable, although not so fast. This is a team of flying instructors, so they're not a full-time aerobatic team as are the Red Arrows, for instance, so they have to do their practicing in their spare time. Nonetheless, they achieve a very high standard of formation aerobatics. We're in the cockpit now with Major Stanislav Rodziniak. The camera's actually mounted on his helmet, so where he looks, we're looking too. And there he is taking off, the number 7 aircraft, catching up with the main formation. And this is the leader, Lieutenant Colonel Ivan Vojka. You can see the other aircraft on his left. And he's leading this formation here. They call this one Ypsilon. See the ground behind him there as he goes over the top of this looping maneuver. The other aircraft almost glued to his wingtips. One of the earliest Eastern European teams to appear at the Royal International Air Tattoo. They've actually been displaying since 1992. And the solo again, Major Stanislav Rodziniak. Here, as usually the case, separate from the main formation. Heading back towards them, though, for an interesting crossover as they approach in tunnel formation. And for the next manoeuvre, he has to reposition himself quite carefully as the main formation pull up into an umbrella break, and he goes up through the middle. There he goes, the shaft of the umbrella. L-39 made by Aerovodochody in originally Czechoslovakia. When the Czech Republic and Slovakia split, the Slovakians took over quite a lot of these aircraft. It's an advanced trainer and light attack aeroplane. A lot of former Warsaw Pact countries use these as their advanced trainers. Back with the leader now, as he gathers the formation together for what the Red Arrows call rollbacks, when either 2 or 1 aircraft pitches up and out of the formation and rolls over and rejoins the formation on the outside. Everybody remaining in the formation shuffles up to make room for the rolling aircraft.
The main theme of this year's Air Tattoo is the 50th anniversary of NATO. The organisation was formed as an alliance of 12 Western nations in 1949 to combat the growing military threat from the Soviet Union. But with the end of the Cold War, its role has changed to that of a world peacekeeper, and peace and friendship are very much in evidence here this weekend. Now, this will be the first time that aircraft from all the member nations, of which there are now 19, have gathered together in public. And the next part of the display traces the history of NATO's air power.
And the first aircraft is this immaculately painted in NATO 50th anniversary colour scheme F-104. Now, this was one of the aircraft that served in NATO's early years. 15 countries bought it. And here's the pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Francesco Prosice, to talk us through his display with the help of our cockpit camera.
Ready for takeoff. The throttle comes full forward in afterburner, and at this moment the speed is increasing to 175 knots, which will be the rotation. After rotation, gear comes up and a low pass at the end of the runway. F-104 was made mainly for air superiority, for air defense all weather. It was used in war during the Vietnam, but since then only the Italian Air Force is keeping the F-104 with the M variant in activity. Now coming back for low pass, low speed. The speed is about 220 knots, and I will demonstrate a turn at low speed. Altitude is 200 feet. Going to the display datum, where I will start with full afterburner, the low speed Schneider at 220 knots. The stick comes full backwards to keep the aircraft turning. The turning performance are not very good because the aircraft doesn't have wings. It's just a rocket with a pilot on it. The aircraft has a very good rolling performance, even though it's a very old aircraft. We are talking about 360 degrees in 1.5 seconds.
One of the other effects of those very small wings is it means that the landing speed is very fast. In fact, the third fastest of any aircraft. The only aircraft that land faster are the Space Shuttle and the SR-71 Blackbird. This thing lands at about 220 knots. And reminding us of the Farnborough air shows in the 50s and 60s, perhaps the lovely single-seat Hunter aircraft, one of the favourite British fighter aircraft post-war, probably one of the best as well. The Hawker Hunter Mark 6A, F6 standing for fighter. In the elegant colour scheme of number 43 Squadron of the Royal Air Force, and actually flown today by an ex-43 Squadron member, Rod Dean. Currently working for the Civil Aviation Authority. And maintaining the NATO theme, these aircraft are actually still flying for the French Navy, but originally went into service with the United States Navy in 1957. This is the F-8 Crusader. These aircraft come from the French Navy's Flottille 12F. Distinctive sound of the Pratt & Whitney J57 engine. Up to date now with the French Air Force and the Mirage 2000. Highly agile fly-by-wire Delta aircraft. From the French Air Force's Ile-de-France Squadron at Orange Air Force Base in the south of France. Captain Raphael Cordelet is the pilot. He's flown more than 80 operational missions in this aircraft, in the Balkans and in the Gulf. This aircraft gets its agility from its fly-by-wire system, but it's basically an unstable airframe. That means to say that if you just let it go, it wouldn't fly very well, but the computers keep it in control. And here is Captain Cordelet flying it with a very high angle of attack, letting the computers take the thing safely along at this high nose-up angle. And there's a good view of the refueling probe just in front of the cockpit there, giving the aircraft an extended range when it's away from base. And some of the representatives here of the opposition to NATO. In the days when the Warsaw Pact was in existence, the MiG-29 was one of the big enemies that NATO had to face up against. This one is from the Slovak Air Force. This is not fly-by-wire. This is all manual controls. Nonetheless beautifully flown by Colonel Ivan Hulek. This aircraft, though, is fly-by-wire. This is the Sukhoi Su-27. And this is another aircraft from the Ukrainian Air Force. We were, in fact, expecting their team of 6 MiG-29s to come, but in the days before the show, they cancelled them. We thought that none of their operational fighters were coming until this aircraft suddenly appeared and landed, so we were delighted to have it at the show. Colonel Ivan Chernyenko flying it. Huge aircraft, this maximum all-up weight 66,000 pounds, more than 30 tons. Nonetheless, an agile fighter. The elegant colour scheme, especially for displays. 2 engines on this aircraft, 2 large Saturn and Ilka turbofan engines, nearly 28,000 pounds of thrust each, and along with an afterburner as well. See them there on the underside of the aircraft, top side at the moment. Back to the western side of NATO again, and this pair are from the French Air Force, the pair of Jaguar E's, 2-seat Jaguars. And they fly in formation, these two, like they're glued together. Lieutenant Sylvain Talvert and Flight Officer Gilles Vallet. Jaguar, an interesting combination, a joint project between Britain and France, and has been thoroughly successful. The aircraft is now being given a midlife update and will continue in service for many years to come. And this aeroplane is, of course, one of the classic NATO bombers, the B-52, the Buffy. These aircraft were, of course, stationed at Fairford during the Kosovo crisis. And if you think it looks a bit, well, old-fashioned, that's because it's really a 1940s aeroplane. It actually first flew in 1952. And the extraordinary thing is that it will still be in service in 2040. Maximum speed of 630 miles an hour, probably not far off it there. And an enormous bomb load. 70,000 pounds of mixed bombs can be carried. Coming into land here with its very strange undercarriage. All of the wheels directly under the main fuselage, which means that it's pretty unstable when those wheels are on the ground. It tends to dip one wing or the other. Hence it has little wheels on stalks out towards the wingtips, but you're never quite sure which way it's going to tip. It depends which side the wind is coming from. It looks like we're tipping down to the left here. And so the wheel under the right wing is well up in the air, while the one on the left-hand side runs along the runway. A very strange beast. From the 93rd Bomb Squadron, the 917th Bomb Wing, Barksdale. And here's the other aircraft that was based at Fairford during the Kosovo crisis, the B-1B. Much more modern than the B-52, much more graceful looking perhaps. A swing wing bomber, variable geometry they call it. The wing sweep can be changed in flight. But interestingly, although it's much newer than the B-52, these aircraft had a considerably lower serviceability rate than the B-52s operating out of Fairford during the Kosovo crisis. And there, the wings are much more swept than they were when the aircraft took off. During the crisis, these aircraft were carrying 84 500-pound bombs.
Well, besides the aircraft taking part in the NATO section of the flying display, the show has representatives from many air arms which took part in the Balkans conflict. Britain, of course, was very much involved in that action, and as well as Fairford playing host to US Air Force bombers, nearby Brize Norton provided a base for refueling operations. Although the NATO air forces sustained minimal losses, many pilots did come under fire, and some have been recounting their experiences.
On 3 out of the 4 missions I flew, we got triple A fired at us, and on one of the missions we got engaged by a surface-to-air missile battery in one of the target areas, which meant that some of the aircraft had to drop their fuel tanks and make evasive manoeuvres. And then it was a case of just looking at the ground and watching for the missiles coming up, because they're obviously quite bright, and then basically just trying to avoid them. The electronic equipment obviously will tell you that perhaps a missile is coming towards you, but it's always useful to be able to look out the window and actually confirm that visually. So the Mark 1 eyeball is certainly a big player.
One of the decisive factors in the conflict was the support provided by AWACS aircraft, which made it virtually impossible for the Serbs to provide defensive air cover. Operating around the clock at high altitude, the AWACS were able to detect every movement which might pose a threat to the NATO bombers.
If you classify a threat as fighter aircraft routinely fly at speeds of over 200 miles per hour, if they travel at that speed, an AWACS, unless the aircraft itself employs stealth technology, the AWACS will detect it. We did see air activity from Serbia. We were watching Belgrade, we were watching Pristina, we did see air activity. So there was a response. How effective that response was has been seen, and our response to their reaction to us, again, was very swift. But I think once they're determined as credible, against to defeat our objective of air superiority, I don't think they had very much of a chance.
The most intriguing aircraft to see action in the Balkans conflict is the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. Now, this is the first time anyone's been able to get anywhere near the thing outside America. Even so, security around the thing is extremely tight. A double cordon with a row of razor wire running down the middle. This aircraft really is something very special. Well, in a moment we'll be hearing from its pilot, Lieutenant Colonel Eric Single. But first, let's take a look at his display of this extraordinary aeroplane.
I agree, Rob, it is quite extraordinary, and it makes me think of nothing so much as Star Wars. I mean, it's just a sort of unbelievable object to see flying. It was, in fact, a dramatic leap forward in technology, a major milestone in US bomber modernization. It's subsonic, unlike most combat aircraft, which go supersonic these days. And it has those engines on top rather than underneath. Now, that's all part of the stealth system, so that radars looking from underneath aren't able to detect the heat of the engines and things like that. Other stealth characteristics, well, there are many classified bits of it to do with composite materials and non-reflective special coatings, but the most important part of it is that all of the surfaces are complex curves. And that distinguishes it from the earlier stealth fighter, which is made up of flat facets. And the difference is, well, it's the amount of computing power that was available in the 10-year separation between the two of them. By the time the B-2 came along, they had enough power to be able to calculate these highly complex curves that make the thing up. And the result is a bomber that can virtually evade radar detection, and at the same time fly with great aerodynamic efficiency. It's much better with its fuel efficiency than earlier bombers, even than the B-1B. And seen end on, well, you can hardly see it. Just 2 crew operate this, compared with 4 for the B-1B or 5 for the B-52. Now, the American Air Force is pretty sensitive about letting people get close to the B-2. But earlier this year, one aircraft was on an operational mission, into Fairford incidentally, and the Air Force allowed us access with our cameras on board the KC-135 refuelling tanker. And here this B-2 is being refueled over Scotland. Now this is the United States Air Force refueling system, where the B-2 flies in very close formation behind the KC-135, and then the boom operator directs the refueling boom onto the pad on top of the B-2 fuselage. So the B-2 pilot doesn't have to maneuver his aircraft other than just to keep it in very close formation with the KC-135 tanker. And it's the job of the boom operator then to complete the docking maneuver. And it's a steady process.
Well, I now have the display pilot with me, Lieutenant Colonel Eric Single. Eric, I have to ask you, as the star of this show, what it is like to fly an aircraft that has no tail fin, for a start.
Oh, it's phenomenal. The advanced flight control system makes it virtually transparent to you that you don't have anything back there, and the airplane maneuvers and handles it very, very well.
When you're operational, what is it like sitting up front and knowing that you cannot be detected on radar?
It's a very secure feeling, but we don't try to kid ourselves either that we know the airplane is not invisible to radar. It just limits the ranges that the radar can pick you up. So it takes a lot of careful planning and looking ahead at the threat systems to put a good, accurate mission together.
And once you've moved on to this, is there anything left for you to fly?
Oh, I'm sure somebody can come up with something, but it is a phenomenal airplane, and I'm very happy doing what I am doing right now.
In contrast to the curves of the B-2 bomber, here is the much earlier stealth fighter, the F-117A Nighthawk, these two on their way into the show at Fairford. This aircraft is flat. There are no curved surfaces on it at all. It's all made up of facets, quite an extraordinary shape. All of the stealth fighters are based at the 49th Fighter Wing at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. "59 of these aircraft were made. They came from the Lockheed Skunk Works. 6 of them have crashed, and we believe that one was actually shot down in the Kosovo crisis. Good view of the facets there. Look at that extraordinarily lumpy shape, and no vertical surfaces at all. There are no vertical lines in this aircraft. That's very important for its non-radar reflectiveness, its stealthiness. One of the effects of having no curved surfaces is that it actually makes for a rather inefficient aerodynamic machine, because wings really need to be curved to provide lift. So left to its own devices, without the aid of computer-controlled fly-by-wire systems, this thing would not fly very well. But the pilot, this is an RAF squadron leader flying it incidentally, Alistair Monkman, well, he says that it flies as sweetly as a hawk, which is quite a compliment to the handling characteristic of any aircraft. You see the flashing red anti-collision light underneath there. That, of course, would not be in use in operations. And something else that's added when the aircraft is flying under normal radar control is they stick some little sort of biscuit box size aluminium boxes underneath the aircraft, and that completely takes away all of its stealthy characteristics, and it can be picked up on normal radars in a normal way. There are also little enhancers that appear when the undercarriage comes down and the undercarriage doors open. That also helps see the thing on radar, and that's just a general added safety practice. It's reminded of Darth Vader somehow, that pointed head. part of the show's coverage of the 50th anniversary of NATO concentrates on naval power. Because even though the Soviets had signed things like non-aggression treaties with Germany, there were still big worries about the strength of Soviet naval power, and indeed about the intentions behind it. So this part of the show has a look at some of NATO's naval air power. These two Sea King Mark VI helicopters are from the Royal Navy, 810 and 814 Squadron. Big helicopter this. The diameter of the rotor is 62 feet, almost a cricket pitch long. Now this is an anti-submarine aircraft. Here is the dipping sonar being lowered out of the belly of the helicopter. This sonar gadget would be dunked beneath the surface of the water. Or also you can use the winching aspects of the aircraft to carry something much more decorative, the white ensign. An interesting colour scheme this aircraft has, because this is one of the few naval Tiger squadrons, so the helicopter has appropriate tiger stripes. Now this aircraft, the Lockheed P-3 Orion, is undoubtedly the most numerous maritime patrol aircraft. This one today is presented by Squadron 30, the US Navy Maritime Patrol Fleet Replacement Squadron. 4 turboprops, and there's the weapons bay open at the front. And the big thing sticking out at the back, the magnetic anomaly detector, the MAD Sting. That's all to do with detecting the magnetic changes that a submarine underwater produces in the surrounding area. Crew of 11 on board this aircraft operationally. 3 pilots, 2 naval flight officers and 6 enlisted crew members doing things like operating all of the aircraft systems. This is the British version of the same thing, an all-jet aircraft this time, the Nimrod. This aircraft is from 206 Squadron at RAF Kinloss in the north of Scotland. Anti-submarine warfare is its main role. Carries a variety of weapons, the Stingray anti-submarine torpedo, the Harpoon anti-ship missile, and also for self-defense against other aircraft. It even carries Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. In fact, the crews like to refer to it as the largest fighter aircraft in the world. As it comes into land, you can see the refueling probe sticking out over the cockpit there. 206 with their elegant display colour scheme.
I'm sitting on one of the most advanced flight decks of any aircraft anywhere in the world, the Lockheed C-130J, the first of which is due to enter RAF service this November. And with me on the flight deck is Lockheed's chief test pilot on the J program, Wayne Roberts. Wayne, what makes this flight deck so advanced?
Well, we've taken digital technology and applied it to a mission computer system that handles virtually everything in the airplane. The cockpit looks relatively conventional, but all it is really is a key set to the mission computer that controls everything. Also, we have a head-up display that's one of the largest flying in the world, and it makes everything a pilot does easier and better.
Hard to imagine that you are sitting on the flight deck of something such as a Hercules. Why do you need this sort of instrumentation in this sort of aircraft?
Well, first of all, it's all based around life cycle cost. You cut it down to 2 pilots and a loadmaster to operate the airplane because so many systems are automated. But much beyond that, the systems are much more reliable. When you go to digital control, it's much cheaper to maintain. The mission computer is very smart. It tells the maintainers what to fix when you come back, and you never lose a sortie.
What about its performance levels over the old Herc?
We've added at least 25% thrust to the engines, so you can see, you'll see during the show this afternoon, we'll have much shorter takeoff distances. And the other thing is, with the enhanced HUD and our GPS system that gives us a map capability, we can fly very close to the ground, very high angles of bank, very safely and very comfortably. So you'll see that the airplane, even though it's a Herc, looks very, very different when it flies.
Wayne, thanks very much indeed. You've kindly agreed to take one of our cameras on board for your display, which you're now going to describe for us.
Okay, we're getting ready for takeoff. Check good power, release the brakes. Thumbs up. Here we go. I'll grab the yoke just at by 80 knots. We'll rotate, we'll probably roll about 1,000 feet. There's the pitch. Break the deck, get the nose off the ground, pitch on up to 30 degrees nose up. We'll be climbing at about 90 knots at a 30-degree pitch up. Pitched over here to accelerate a little bit, and we'll simulate trying to get away from the ground as quickly as we can. I'm rolling into about a 55-degree angle of bank, doing a spiraling climb right above the field. I use the HUD to get my situational awareness, angle of bank, G, my relationship to stall speed. It's an excellent reference. It's the widest field of view HUD flying in any airplane. It really gives the pilot a good feel, especially in an airplane like this, high angles of bank. You can't see out of the airplane very well because we don't have a canopy. Anyway, there's power back. I'm going to roll the airplane back around and then head back downhill, come right back down to show center. Get the display center again, turn left, and I complete a 360-degree turn, close to 90 degrees angle of bank. Do that without exceeding 3 Gs. I just let the altitude bleed down. And I start to turn about 1,000 feet. When I complete the 360, right back over show center, I'll be about 450 feet, 170 knots. Just back over the show center, roll out. And for the final approach to landing, I put power up, go straight back up rapidly, put the gear and flaps down. There's the gear down, flaps are down. Push the airplane back over and make a steep right-hand approach. Again, I could never do this without the use of the HUD and the head-down display. I can see where the airplane's going by looking at the map below me. The predicting vector shows where the airplane's going to roll out. And kind of magically, I trust my displays. I roll out, and there's the runway right in front of me. Down to about 400 feet to set up for the caisson approach, which is a steep approach to simulate getting over a ridge line or trying to get above small arms fire, that kind of thing. Have a pushover point programmed into the display on the runway center line. It's GPS stabilized, and precisely when to push over, I push down to 20 degrees nose down on the HUD, down to 100 feet radar altimeter, pull up, flare. There's a max reverse, maximum braking, nose wheel steering, and we'll stop in about 10 seconds and about 1,000 feet.
Test pilot Wayne Roberts talking us through the display of the latest C-130J version. Now, this is a much older version of the Hercules, and it's demonstrating one of the more unusual roles of the aircraft. These big tubes, they're 18 inches in diameter, give the game away. It's a water bomber. And it can drop 3,000 gallons in about 5 seconds. It lays down a 1/4 mile long trail, 60 foot wide, and it's good for putting out fires.
Water bomber, I want you to brake left to position behind the crowd, downwind left hand.
Right up to date now with America's newest airlift aircraft, the C-17. Call this the Globemaster 3. Unlike the C-130s we saw, this is 4 jets rather than turboprops. A large aeroplane, this. The wingspan from tip to tip about half the length of a soccer pitch. Huge flaps on the trailing edge of the wing there, and droops on the leading edge, all there to increase the lift and give it its interesting slow-speed handling characteristics, included in which are, of course, its very useful short airfield capabilities. The point of this aircraft is that it combines the intercontinental cargo carrying capacities of things like the C-5 Galaxy with the short runway capability of the much smaller C-130 aircraft. The aircraft's about to demonstrate a full flap approach on a simulated short runway, landing very far down the runway. And the capability allows the aircraft to land at 6,000 more airfields worldwide than are currently available to aircraft like the Starlifter and the Galaxy and commercial wide-bodied aircraft. And there's the reverse thrust coming in, slowing the aircraft down. And in fact making it go backwards. During the NATO peacekeeping mission to Bosnia, C-17 crews airlifted nearly a half of the total cargo in only about a quarter of the missions. And during that time they boasted an impressive 96% reliability rate. And much of that was in and out of airfields that aren't accessible to other large aircraft. And when you're going backwards like this in a big aeroplane, one thing you don't do is put the brakes on to stop. If you do that, the thing tips on its tail. What you have to do is reverse the thrust of the engines again and throttle up and slow it down that way.
Well, there's an even bigger transport here this year. It's the Ukrainian-built Antonov 124, and it's making its first appearance at the show. The Antonov isn't taking part in the flying display, but our Hawk camera ship did manage to get alongside it on its way into Fairford. This aircraft is huge. At 405 tons maximum all-up weight, it's bigger than the largest Boeing 747 and holds the record for load carrying. Its cavernous hold can swallow 2 40-ton trucks or the entire fuselage of a small airliner. Its manufacturers have ambitions to sell the 124 to Western countries, including Britain. The fact that it's here demonstrates how, besides being a public air show, the Royal International Air Tattoo is now seen as a showcase for the aerospace industry. The Antonov's operators were quite happy to park it next to the more familiar C-5 Galaxy. The C-5 isn't seen as direct competition, but even so, they say the Ukrainian giant can offer more.
The Antonov 124 is actually a bigger aeroplane than the C-5 Galaxy. It's used much more commercially than the C-5 Galaxy. This aircraft has greater potential and is half the price of a C-5 Galaxy in operations. We are putting a bid into the British government at the moment where we re-engine these aircraft with Rolls-Royce engines and avionics, and we hope this will become used by the Ministry of Defence as their future heavy lift aircraft requirement.
The Antonov making its debut here, but the next display is an old favourite with the Fairford crowds and indeed with air shows all over the world. Just coming down the runway behind me, the RAF's Red Arrows, currently enjoying their 35th display season. Leader Simon Meade is making his last tour of duty with the team, but we have perfect conditions here. A wide expanse of blue sky, 9 Red Hawks about to thunder down the runway. Time to sit back and enjoy the RAF's aerobatic team, the Red Arrows.
And I'm sure the leader, Simon Meade, is enjoying it because he's just been promoted from squadron leader to wing commander, and it's actually the first time that the Red Arrows have ever been led by a wing commander. They take off effectively in 2 groups, a 5 and a 4. Streaming a little bit of smoke to start with. The smoke, of course, made by squirting diesel fuel into the hot jet exhaust, and it vaporizes and comes out like smoke. The front 5, called Enid after the famous 5, and the back 4 catching up with them. For some reason they're known as Jippo. And there they are in their Diamond 9 shape. Enid, the famous 5, heading away there with their red and blue smoke. A lovely colour picture. Next, it's the Synchro pair and the aircraft of Flight Lieutenant Dicky Patunas. And we can go on board with the cockpit camera. He's heading towards Squadron Leader Andy Cubing. That was a combined speed of more than 600 miles an hour. The remaining 7 aircraft of the 9 in a slow and graceful looping maneuver. And getting now into the shape they call Vixen, after the famous naval fighter, the Sea Vixen. Synchro pair again, heading towards each other for a crossover, and now comes the finale. Out of that Vixen shape, the Vixen break. Well, the Red Arrows are undoubtedly favourites all around the world. This aeroplane is a favourite in the Air Force. This is the Canberra, and it's 50 years old this year. It first flew on the 13th of May, 1949. And that P means prototype. So this aircraft is painted in the colours of the original prototype Canberra VN799 when it flew from the English Electric factory airfield at Warton. This is an RAF aircraft, and it's flown by Squadron Leader Terry Cairns of number 39 Squadron. It's actually a T4, that's the trainer version, which is used to convert crews onto the current operational Canberra, which is the PR9. But they've painted it in this beautiful colour scheme to commemorate the 50th birthday, this colour scheme of the original Canberra prototype. The B-2 version of the Canberra was the RAF's first jet bomber, and it was designed rather like the Mosquito had been during the Second World War, to be fast enough to escape interceptors and at the same time carry a 6,000-pound bomb load over about 750 miles. Crew of 2 and a radar bomb sight for blind bombing. Well, that was the idea, but actually it never got round to carrying the radar bomb sight. There's the large bomb bay, carry those 6,000 pounds of bombs. And this Canberra, with its different modern hemp colour scheme and its offset cockpit, is flying into the show on one of the days before the flying displays so that it could be on static show.
Well, in spite of its age, the Canberra remains in frontline service with the RAF. This is the business, the photo reconnaissance version, the PR9. And Squadron Leader Brian Cole is a navigator on here. It's a navigator's nightmare, this aircraft.
On the contrary, it is the business. It's good jet.
But you are shut away in the nose cone, no physical contact between you and the pilot. Maybe that's
a good thing at times.
Might be a good thing, but you're very isolated in there.
Well, no more isolated than you might be sitting behind a pilot in a tornado. Maybe you don't want to touch the pilot, but ideally, if you're going to do this particular job, you want to be able to see forward and you want to be able to see down. And the old marks of Canberra, particularly the PR7, the PR3, the navigator sat traditionally behind the pilot and then had to get out of his seat, unstrap, and crawl forward and go into a glass nose so that he could do his business and then crawl back, get strapped in again. Now, as you can imagine, if there's an emergency, the guys would have to leap backwards very quickly, get into parachute straps, seat straps, and get ready maybe to eject. Now, the advantage of this is that you are in a seat, whether you're operating at low level or in a threatened environment or wherever, you're well placed to operate the aircraft safely.
Another display team now, and this one is unique in two respects. First of all, because it's 5 helicopters, and secondly, because 4 of them are of one type, there are 4 Gazelles, and 1 is a Lynx. These are the Army Air Corps Blue Eagles. This is the Lynx anti-tank helicopter. You can see the racks for the anti-tank missiles on the side there. Extremely agile, this helicopter. Now that ought to be impossible for a helicopter to do, because they're not supposed to be able to fly upside down, but Lynx can. The smaller Gazelles doing synchronized maneuvers now. Gazelle is a single-engined aircraft. Jointly made by Britain and France, Aerospatiale and Westland. Lynx ditto, but Lynx is a much larger 2-engined helicopter. 2 engines incidentally driving the single rotor. The pilots that fly these aircraft are instructors at the School of Army Aviation at Middle Wallop. And here comes another of those amazing Lynx backflips. There was a time when the Army decided it shouldn't do this because it actually wasn't cleared to do it in the aircraft documentation, but evidently they've decided they can do it now. And very welcome it is too. Well, a little piece of aerial theatre here, and this is part of the 75th anniversary celebrations of the Royal Auxiliary Air Force, because the people flying and operating these aircraft are mostly Auxies, members of the Auxiliary Air Force. This is a Puma of number 33 Squadron, stationed at Benson in Oxfordshire. And the airfield we're looking at, we have to imagine, is in Bosnia. There are thousands of refugees in the hills all around. The airfield is damaged, but it is usable. It's important to secure it as what the military call an airhead. That's the place where you fly supplies into and people out of. So the securing bit comes first. These are members of 14 Royal Auxiliary Air Force Regiment Squadron. And they're going to form a security cordon so that bigger aircraft can land on the airfield. The helicopter disappears, And very shortly afterwards, we expect to see the large transport aircraft. And there is the first one of two. Belongs to number 57, Reserve Squadron. Based at RAF Lynham, doing a short tactical landing, bringing in vehicles. And in the meantime, the RAF regiment gunners are protecting the cordon. The Hercules very quickly slows to a halt with the aid of its reversed thrust propellers, and almost immediately the vehicles come out. Staffed by, you've guessed it, the Royal Auxiliary Air Force aeromedical people. They're going to set up a casualty clearance station. Now a 4x4 truck, crewed by Auxiliary Air Force volunteers of 2624 Squadron. That's going to set up a movements depot to control inbound and outbound passengers and freight. Almost immediately, the Hercules airborne again on a short tactical takeoff. And another piece of aerial theatre here. We've heard a lot about this kind of thing, lethal raids on troop concentrations by ground attack aircraft. And this is how it's done. These are the troop concentrations on the airfield here, and the aircraft flying overhead is a Harrier acting as an airborne forward air controller, Flight Lieutenant Pat Voigt of number 20 Squadron. And he's briefing a pair of Jaguars on the details of the target.
Description. Vehicles and troops in the open.
And here come the two Jaguars from number 6 Squadron at Coltishall, each carrying 1,000-pound bombs.
Jaguars copied, good read back. Stand by for clearance.
Bombs dropped from about 150 feet. As soon as the smoke is cleared from the battlefield, the Harrier comes back in again using his reconnaissance pod to do some battle damage assessment. And at the same time, he drops a cluster bomb on the target just to make sure. So that's the serious theatre part. Now it's the pantomime part of the Harrier doing its display as a pure fun aeroplane, the hovering bit that ordinary jet fighters can't do. And a salute from the two Jaguars at the same time. Harrier is left holding the centre stage. Pat Voigt sitting high up in his cockpit there, doing a bow towards the President's enclosure. Huge air intakes for the slow-speed Harrier. Only slow under these conditions. And there's the jet efflux going straight down from that vectored thrust nozzle just inside the wing there. And the weapons racks all along the wing, tipping the aircraft down so it can come to land with a rolling vertical landing. Very short ground run distance.
As with all air shows, the most important issue here is safety. But whatever steps the organisers take to protect the public and the aircrews themselves, there's always a chance that something will go wrong. This aircraft is an Italian-built G222. It's a small transport plane that's been seen several times before here at Fairford. During its display, we saw what appeared at first to be a bird strike.
Spirit 19, Rod. Spirit 19, you are clear to land for runway 09er. Wind is 008 degrees 8 knots. Spirit 19, Fairford. Commercial vehicles on request. What is the problem?
The G222 landed, and it soon became obvious that the crew were dealing with an emergency. They quickly unstrapped themselves, let down the ramp, and ran onto the tarmac as fire crews arrived on the scene. The incident held up the flying display for several minutes. Back on the apron, the drama unfolded. A rubber de-icing boot had become detached from the left-hand propeller. Some of the debris had punched holes in the fuselage, The rest can be seen falling from the aircraft. The crew experienced severe vibrations from the out-of-balance propeller.
We heard this big bang coming from the left and right side of the fuselage. And then a lot of vibrations all over. We couldn't read the cockpit, not even one instrument. We just looked on the left-hand side. The runway was just there, so we decided maneuverability was not a problem, just to go down and land.
More pictures now from our Hawk camera aircraft. And these are the Casa 101 trainers of the Spanish Patrulla Águila, the Eagle team, in their beautiful Spanish national colours of red and yellow on the silver aircraft. Very elegant. Diving down through the cloudscape to get into Fairford for the show. And here they are in the display, taking off, with their smoke streaming. All 7 aircraft taking off together. 4 in the first group, 3 in the second. Team led by Major Francisco Fernandez. And all of the pilots are instructors at the Central Academy of the Air Force at San Javier in Murcia. Team's been flying since 1985. And they're regular favourites at Royal International Air Tattoos. And as they head towards their audience, another of those spectacular breaks coming up. And here's the solo, pulling vertically up past the formation. Solo is Captain Francisco Recuerto, and in fact there are 3 Franciscos in the team. It's been quite complicated finding out who's what. A different version of the rollback manoeuvre that we've seen with other teams today. But the thing for which this team is justifiably famous, as far as I know they're the only team doing this, is landing on the runway with all 7 aircraft at the same time. The back ones touch down first. Olé, the Patrulla Águila.
Now, there's great sadness at this year's show over the death of King Hussein of Jordan, himself a pilot and a long-standing patron of the air tattoo. The King, seen here inspecting the Swiss national display team a few years ago, was a regular visitor to Fairford, usually arriving aboard his own de Havilland Dove. His widow, Queen Noor, and other members of the Jordanian royal family are here to see a special tribute to His Majesty. Well, during this afternoon's fly past, the King's son, His Royal Highness Prince Faisal, will be at the control of the King's favourite aircraft, this delightful de Havilland Dove. Your Royal Highness, presumably this will be a very poignant moment for you to be at the controls of his favourite aeroplane at an event that meant so much to your father.
Yes, it will. He's had a long association with the air tattoo, and he's actually flown in this particular aircraft into an event a couple of years ago. And our association also with the Disabled Scholarship, which is disabled flying, are 2 things that are very dear to his heart.
So there is Prince Faisal taxiing out in the Dove. And alongside him, the 4 extra 300s of the Royal Jordanian Falcons, the national aerobatic team. They'll be flying on his wingtips for this memorial flypast. Now, the Dove was one of King Hussein's favourite aeroplanes. There's a lovely story about when he was a young man and he was told that he was never going to be allowed to fly solo because of his position as king. He was a natural aviator and he knew that he was ready to go solo. So he just went and got into the Dove while people were distracted with some other things on the airfield, and he flew it for quite a while. And then he returned for a perfect landing. And nothing more was ever said about him not going solo, even when he flew in his own single-seat Hunter. So there's the Dove approaching today. And following this formation with the 4 extra 300s are 4 Jaguars of number 6 Squadron Royal Air Force. Now 6 had unique connections with Jordan. Indeed, King Hussein's father, King Abdullah, presented the squadron with a Jordanian Royal Standard, making them the only RAF squadron with a non-British Royal Standard. So the 4 Jaguars of 6 Squadron are going to fly the missing man formation for King Hussein. You will see one of the aircraft of the formation pull up and out, signifying the one who doesn't come back from the battle. That's the missing man. And I'm sure it's true to say that for many people at the Royal International Air Tattoo, the missing man was also their missing king. Well, now something in complete contrast to the rest of the flying display. For the first time at a Royal International Air Tattoo, a glider display. Brought in by 2 super chipmunks with big engines, these 2 K-21 gliders belong to the Royal Air Force Gliding and Soaring Association, and it's their 50th anniversary year. The 2 pilots are Squadron Leader Chris Heames and Jamie Allen. And I've never seen gliders flying in formation like this before. It really is the most lovely display. And imagine how difficult it is for Jamie trying to keep up with his leader when he doesn't have an engine, he doesn't have a throttle to open when he's falling behind a bit. He just has to cut corners if he really needs to catch up. Two-seat aeroplanes these, they're training aircraft, obviously aerobatic, and they're stressed to up to 6G. You can pull 6 times your normal weight in these aircraft. Gliders can do the most unbelievable things. The height record in a glider, and this is not being towed up, this is just using thermals in the air for getting up, is 39,000 feet. And the distance record for a single flight in the UK is more than 1,000 kilometres. And there is a heart. Isn't that lovely? Now a solo display from Ian Tunstall, who's actually a participant in the World Glider Aerobatic Championships. This is a low 100 glider, and evidently it can fly upside down for more or less as long as you like. Coming down at quite high speed there, and Ian Tunstall just rolling it the right way up and positioning himself for his landing. One of the things about these gliders is they go on for such a long time that actually to get them down on the ground is quite difficult. They want to stay in the air. Let's take a look now at 2 of the aircraft that actually won prizes for the excellence of their flying displays at the Royal International Air Tattoo. This one is the Slingsby Firefly, the T-67M, and it belongs to JEFTS, Joint Elementary Flying Training School of the Royal Air Force, and it's flown by Captain Alan Wade. He's a very experienced display pilot. In fact, he is a display examiner. There's a flick maneuver, the aircraft rolling of its own accord, but still ending up pointing in the same direction as it started. This is the little basic training aircraft of the Royal Air Force, but flown by civilians these days. Side by side, two-seater. Alan Wade taking it round in a series of rolls in part of a circle. His performance won him the Sir Douglas Bader Trophy for the best overall flying display. And another of the prize winners at a completely different end of the scale as far as size and noise of aeroplanes is concerned, conducting here incidentally an immaculate slow roll, and the slower you do this manoeuvre, the more difficult it is. But this is Captain Anders Eriksson of the Swedish Air Force in his JA-37 Viggen aircraft. An amazingly punchy aeroplane, this. Dates back to 1967, so quite old, but with one enormous Volvo Flygmotor engine producing 28,000 pounds of thrust. Well, that's enough to take it up to a maximum speed of more than Mach 2, more than twice the speed of sound. It's extraordinary canard shape, with instead of a tailplane, they have that little wing at the front of the big delta with the crank leading edge. Big auxiliary fuel tank under the centre line there, and plenty of other weapons racks as well. And Captain Eriksson won the Lockheed Martin Canesta Trophy for the best flying display by an overseas participant. Well, we're nearly at the end of the show now, and the finale continues the overall theme of 50 years of NATO. It's a spectacular that you won't see anywhere else. It's taken months of planning to make sure of the participation of all of the 19 NATO members. And it starts with aircraft taxiing onto the runway and then turning to face the audience. An absolutely multifarious selection of aeroplanes. Some of them in the special NATO colour schemes for the occasion. And in the middle, the NATO AWACS, the Airborne Warning and Control System. Now, this is the only aircraft type that's owned by NATO itself, as opposed to being owned by the member nations. And behind all the aircraft on the runway, the helicopters in a high hover position. And the numbers total 50. One for each year of NATO's life. Now, once they're all in position, with the helicopters hovering behind the aircraft parked on the runway and those aircraft pointing towards the audience, the next thing is a fly-past signifying the friendship between East and West. So, from the earliest days of NATO, a Mark 16 Spitfire and a Yak-11, a Russian fighter that was in service as a fighter and subsequently as a trainer with the Soviet Union when NATO started. Close formation symbolizing friendship. Next, the early jet scene is represented by a Vampire and the L-29 Delphin. Vampire, one of the early British jets. The Delphin, a trainer aircraft that was used by the Warsaw Pact countries in the 60s. Now the Hunter, paired off with a Soko Galeb. Galeb was another trainer, roughly contemporary with the Hunter, produced in Yugoslavia. And the next pair are contemporaries by virtue of the fact that they're still in service at the same time, but they're really of a different generation. The French Navy Crusader, the F-8 first flew in the mid-50s, still being made well into the 60s, whereas the MiG-29, possibly the most famous Russian aeroplane, came into service in the mid-80s, but they are both still in service. And the final East meets West pair are real contemporaries, the current RAF Long-Range Interceptor Tornado F3 and the brilliantly successful Sukhoi Su-27 air superiority fighter. And that unique gathering of aircraft on the ground and in the air rounds off the NATO 50th anniversary celebrations. But what of the future for the treaty organisation? Well, Secretary-General Xavier Solana describes NATO's vision of Europe as one in which all nations can live together in peace and prosperity. It's a Europe whose people feel secure, threatened neither by their neighbours nor by their leaders.
Well, the show's not quite over for all the air crews because, as you can see, they're gathered outside this hangar for a huge party. As well as taking part, many of the airmen have been watching the displays of others. So let's find out what they liked best.
I thought the Harrier was very super.
MiG-29 and a Mirage 2000 was absolutely outstanding.
The MiG-29 was neat. That was a good display. Never seen one of those fly before.
Actually, the Su-27 was pretty good.
One jet's much like another jet. It can't beat the B-52. F-18 Hornet rules.
It's got to be the Red Arrows. Yeah, they ruled. They ruled. That was an awesome display.
Well, that's about it after a great weekend's flying here at the Royal International Air Tattoo. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed filming it. Next year, the show will move to another airfield while the runway here at Fairford is resurfaced. Now, exactly where that'll be hasn't yet been decided, but wherever it is, you can rest assured that it'll still be the world's greatest military air show. For now, though, from Fairford, it's goodbye.